Revenue operations is much more than words in a job title. It's a methodology that is transforming sales, marketing, and customer success teams into high-performing revenue drivers. However, many revenue leaders still have critical questions about how to operationalize it. Furthermore, they want to know what others in the industry are doing. That's why we conducted original research and put together our findings in the 2021 Revenue Operations and Customer Acquisition Benchmark Report. In partnership with RevOps Squared, we asked hundreds of cross-departmental revenue leaders across top companies to reveal their approach to revenue planning, analytics and revenue operations, and customer acquisition. We've identified exactly how teams are aligning to hit their revenue targets, as well as the new activity, pipeline, and customer acquisition benchmarks to strive for in 2021 and beyond. Download the entire report for free at ringDNA.com/RevOpsReport.
What if your sales team could know the moment a buyer arrives on your website and talk with them instantly? With Qualified's conversational sales and marketing platform purpose-built for Salesforce, that's all possible. It's not rocket science, it's common sense. Conversations move deals forward. Live chat, voice calls, and meeting bookers accelerate sales conversations without a single email exchange. Capture prospects in that magic moment when they're most interested in learning about your business. Head on over to qualified.com to chat with their team and learn more.
The day one of partnering with that investor is going to be just reintroduction of so much operational risk. And so you've built this nice structure and it has a great foundation. And then all of a sudden you're like, all right, we're going to try to build an absolute high rise on top of this structure. And by virtue of doing that, you're really kind of jeopardizing, kind of re-exposing the foundation you built to risk, to dramatic risk.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was Matt Melymuka. Matt's the co-founder and partner at PeakSpan Capital. Now, Matt's an experienced venture investor in SaaS companies, and he believes that the growth at all costs, unicorn or bust venture model is totally crazy for most companies. And I have to admit, I couldn't agree more, which is one of the reasons I was so interested in having Matt on the show. Now, as Matt points out in our conversation, that in the last 10 years, with 8 of those in a very bullish market, the odds that a business will have a $500 million exit, even if it hits $100 million exit value, is about 3%. As he points out, the chances of that a company will grow a horn and be wreathed in rainbows are about 0.3%. So here's the focal point of our conversation today. If the success rate of this sales model is so low, why are investors so wedded to this playbook that has such a low probability of success? Well, we're going to get into all of that and much, much more. But before we get to Matt, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could also give us your feedback about how we're doing in the form of a review. So thank you. All right, let's jump into it.
Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate you having me.
It's my pleasure, our pleasure. So tell us a bit about PeakSpan Capital. I mean, you're sort of position yourself as a different type of venture capitalist.
Yeah, and venture capitalist. I think that's an easy way to describe the stage of investing that we play in, but sometimes maybe increasingly has at least an emotive, provoking or emotion.
Initial reaction that people have is like
connotation. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, vulture capital.
And one I agree with, to be honest, quite candidly, too, a lot of. So we position ourselves as what we call an emerging growth stage investment firm. And so I think classically you have kind of on the two ends of the spectrum, early stage venture and then, buyout private equity. In the middle is kind of the nice blend of the two in growth equity, which, in its initial kind of pure form, back in the 90s, launched by Summit Partners and TA. It was really trying to blend, the best of both worlds, which is a more mature business, a business that's run pretty efficiently, not ingesting gobs of capital to get to the stage and scale, at which the companies are when these these investors look to partner with them. You know, back when the model was launched and really launched and kind of enabled by, you know, the proverbial engine room, where you have these, you know, young, overeducated, highly articulate folks from Ivy League schools calling companies, trying to get them to take your money. It was probably pretty interesting, I think, to get a call from an investment firm as an entrepreneur back then. You probably didn't know much about venture capital or private equity. You weren't getting a ton of calls or emails, you know, back then from investors. And so I think over time, that model has just become incredibly saturated and even, you know, permeated the venture industry, such that most firms really today go to market really with the equivalent, if you think about it, of an SDR, and they're kind of calling the, you know, the CEO or the enterprise leader, decision maker of a business, right? If you're kind of using the sales, the strategic sales team analogy, and that's just a weird way to do it from our perspective. And so we can come back to that and get into more detail there. We actually only have, you know, senior people, partners, and principals reaching out to companies, and it's partners and principals with a real perspective on your company. We write really long, probably too long, very verbose emails about why we love a business, why we want to, you know, get in front of you. And we really try to just be helpful and have a different conversation and different level of rapport from that first call and every call thereafter. And so in terms of where we play, just to get back to the emerging growth stage comment, we're looking for companies that are really have stripped away some of the binary risk levers associated with classic early stage venture. So you've got a real product and you've got real revenue and customers. You know, interestingly, today, I would say for a $3 or $4 million SaaS business, just by virtue of the fact that there's so much data and so many tools being leveraged to capture that data and understand it, I probably have more insight into how a company's engine is working at a $3 million scale today than I did maybe at 10 million 10 years ago, if that makes sense. Because
absolutely.
You can get confidence and comfort so much earlier. So we're looking for companies right in that range, call it 3 to 10 million of ARR, growing nicely, capital efficient, playing in strategic sectors of B2B software. All we do is B2B software, and doing things that are interesting and we think have real potential and value, but not necessarily frothy and on the cover of TechCrunch. And you haven't ingested, you know, gobs of venture capital to get where you are. And so that's really the profile that we look for.
Well, and you write about it on your blog, and you guys have a good blog, is that, you know, you guys believe that the growth at all costs or the unicorn or bust venture models totally crazy for most companies. Yet this is the model that I think so many entrepreneurs have in mind when they look for capital.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I was pausing to see if you were going to share your perspective on it. I'd be curious to get.
Yeah, I think it's crazy. I do think it's crazy. I think that, you know, and this is not a new phenomenon, right? This has gone on for, you know,
absolutely
for decades. Is, you know, there are companies that are and entrepreneurs that are trying to build sustainable companies. And there are entrepreneurs that are trying to basically running a promotion. and the promotion is, yeah, how can we pump this thing full of enough, whatever at this point, hot air or whatever, in order to, you know, achieve a certain status, attract certain funding, and exit as quickly as we can. And that's sort of been my experience over decades working in startups and raising money myself and so on, is that, yeah, and I've been fortunate to work for a lot of entrepreneurs that took money that wanted to build companies and they wanted to run companies for a long time. And sure, they wanted to exit at some point, get liquid at some point, but also experienced the other side where people just sort of, I don't want to say pump and dump, but was sort of close to that. And I think we have a lot of that going on these days.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think I totally agree with all of that. And I think it's hard to generalize because there's different reasons people start businesses and become entrepreneurs. There's different reasons why folks want to be investors and work with companies. I think some of the craziness from my perspective, and what you just described, by the way, if it is, you know, two or several adults getting into an engagement and relationship where everyone is aware and totally, you know, upfront and transparent about what that relationship and kind of engagement model is, that's totally fine, right? So whether it's, we're going to grow and invest as much as we can, or we're going to try to get, back to profitability and build a sustainable business on just this round of capital, as long as you're talking about what the objectives are and aligning, your goals with your ambitions, that's totally fine.
Sure.
I think one of the interesting things to me, and part of the reason that I believe this model has become so prevalent and really so pervasive, and I think, to some degree, entrepreneurs have almost been kind of conditioned to think that it's the only way to do it because it's really the only model they see or the only model that's talked about in the media and in some of these realms like, SaaStr and some of the blogosphere.
Right.
I think it's largely because not because it's the best way to do it, right? Not because it's the proven best way or the highest probability way or just the most kind of natural, sane way to do it. It's really, in my view, been pushed a lot by the rise of increasing amounts of capital. So just so much capital, not enough great opportunities, which creates a weird dynamic. And really the rise of these massive $1 billion plus early stage funds that really need to pursue that model, right? So if you have like $2 billion of early stage capital, it's really hard for you just from a time management perspective to, spend enough time with every company. And you kind of have to pursue this portfolio theory approach of pushing every company to really, be the next, it's like the Russian cosmonauts, right? Let's fire them all at the moon and hope, one of them doesn't burn up in the atmosphere. And so the perverse thing from my perspective is that's fine. Again, if you're talking about, what that means, it's just a little weird that, the model I really believe is really, where it is today and as prevalent as it is today, because that is what the venture investor needs versus what the company needs. And so,
a huge disconnect there, I think. And my concern is I look at from a sales perspective and a go-to-market perspective is that, what's considered best practices by and large aren't really geared toward creating sustainable enterprises. Because you look at, it's not uncommon in SaaS businesses that, win rates on your most qualified opportunities run about 20%, which means that your go-to-market strategy is predicated on the fact that your value proposition is so weak that you can only win one of every 5 opportunities that are your most highly qualified opportunities. But that's okay because, your go-to-market strategy is predicated on filling the top of the funnel with enough opportunities that you can sort of sustain yourself for a while on that low win rate. But at some point, you have to learn how to sell and grow a business that's, again, can be sustained.
Well, and that's a really interesting point too, Andy. And I think it's a great kind of corollary to what we're talking about on the investing side, because, I think similarly, in venture, there's what's called a capital loss ratio, which is effectively for every dollar you invest, how much goes to zero. The average in venture is 35.4%. So 3.5 out of every 10 companies you're investing in go to zero. Some of the quote unquote tier 1 firms that are really kind of pushing this, this growth at all cost methodology, some of those firms have 50-60% capital loss. And so if I'm an entrepreneur and, I have most of my tangible net worth and adult life invested in building this one company, I'm not a portfolio manager. And so a binary outcome is not palatable to me. and again, if I know that and I'm comfortable with that, that's one thing. But, if you're an early stage $2 million ARR business and you are kind of high-fiving because you raised $50 million at a huge price, like that's fine, but just know what that means, because you've kind of backed yourself into a corner where you have to your point, Andy, grow really unnaturally. And you kind of have to overextend yourself in the hopes of not being that zero, but being one of those ones in that capital loss equation. And so it's just an interesting kind of approach and model, and not one that I think needs to be pursued as much as it really is. I think the interesting part about that too is what that really breeds from an investor and kind of asset level perspective is just kind of a massive commoditization of what capital really is and means. So, if that's what you're doing, and kind of inherently and definitionally, you're not really doing much to engage and work with the company and collaborate, and you're instead just kind of, pushing the same model and giving them a bunch of cash. If I'm the entrepreneur, I'm kind of inherently going with the highest price and the most money, right? Because alignment's not really part of the equation because we don't have any. And so that's a weird way to do it. And it just kind of, I think most investors have accepted the fact that their quote unquote product quality doesn't matter. And so we try to really reframe the conversation and really work hard to demonstrate the quality of our product and the value that we can provide. And it's not a great fit for every entrepreneur, to be honest, right? If you're a kind of a hired gun CEO and you have 3% of the company and you live in the Valley, you kind of probably want to go for a big outcome too. But if you're an owner operator, it's your first time doing it and you own 50% of the business, you're really looking for a partner who's going to help and fight like hell for you. And so our capital loss ratio, which I think really kind of elucidates that the best across 50 companies, my partners and I have worked together on 25 at our prior firm, about actually 29 now at PeakSpan. We've only lost money one time. So our capital loss ratio, I think, is like 2.7%. And that doesn't mean we're the best or luckiest investors in the world. It just means that when things go sideways, we're not running for the doors. And really importantly, initially, we're really all aligning transparently about what are we building towards, how do we get there, and what's reasonable to kind of help us get there, versus, all right, we're closed, let's raise, let's hire 50 reps tomorrow, regardless of what the infrastructure is to support it.
Right. Well, first of all, you win an award for being the first guest on the show to use the word elucidate. So
there we go.
That's a milestone over close to 1,000 episodes now.
As the son of a copy editor, mother, and lifelong writer, she will be very, very pleased to hear that.
That's right. And we'll put the definition in the show notes page if people need help with that. But let's talk about what you guys do differently. And because one of the reasons I was really interested in talking with you, because as I was researching you, and this really caught my attention, is because I'm, as people know that follow the show and my writing and so on, is the growth at all costs model, I think, is nutso, and it's creating all sorts of behaviors that people think are good behaviors that actually are bad behaviors in so many ways, at least on the sales side. So tell us what you guys do differently. You talk about being more collaborative. You're not running for the exits, and I believe I've experienced investors running for the exits. As one firm, we raised a bunch of money right before the bust in 2008, and that's, as you may recall, if you raise money, unfortunately, right before 2008, before the market collapse, you're sort of labeled as damaged goods.
A great way to get to know your investor partner, right? I partnered with a hospitality tech business in February of last year, and the CEO called me freaking out, when COVID came down, and it was a great way to really test the relationship. I immediately said, like, relax, we're a private company, and we're going to figure this out together. But it's never easy building a company, and things always go sideways or south. To answer your question, Andy, in terms of what we do differently, it really starts and kind of is all founded on our premise of just focus and specialization, breeding success and leading to just really being able to help and almost have an entrepreneur to entrepreneur level of rapport, because we're living in the categories that our teams are. So first and foremost, focus and specialization. So we only do B2B software. I lead 3 themes and 3 themes only for our firm, and that's marketing tech, sales tech, and hospitality tech. So sales tech, this conversation, I spend probably 50% of my time reading the same stuff and thinking about the same stuff that you guys do and the entrepreneurs I work with do. So you can just have a really informed level of dialogue. Mm-hmm. I think that's point one, being generalist and going from like a clean tech board meeting to an e-scooter board meeting to a crypto session. I'm not smart enough to do that. And so it strikes me as odd that is often the case, and what you can bring to bear if you do that. So that's part of it. And I think, from there, we work really, really hard to really drive impact and help and support our companies with tangible action and actual, honest to goodness work, whatever that might mean. And I'll give some examples. because we only have senior folks reaching out to companies, the junior folks at our firm spend all of their time helping our companies. So they're not cold calling companies all day. Their job is instead to be almost like a McKinsey level kind of, strategic financial consulting bench focused on sales tech that thinks about, all right, what can we do to help this business today? And we do those things before we partner, because most entrepreneurs, when they hear that, are like, yawn, quote unquote, value add. Of course, I've heard this before. What does that mean, right?
Right.
And so what we look to do is really, kind of demonstrate that. So we do it a bunch of different ways. So it might be, as simple as thought partnership or introductions. That's so table stakes. I think that's what a lot of firms kind of claim they're best at, but it's so table stakes.
Well,
it's things like,
and also they're usually not as forthcoming with them as they lead the entrepreneur to believe. I can
for sure.
I can vouch for that.
Yeah. And I think, part of our job and part of the challenge is literally we're overcoming the connotation of every investor's value add, but nobody does anything. And so we're starting from a place of skepticism. And so that's why we do a lot of work for companies before we're even partnered to kind of prove it. So it can be really anything under the sun. We've been building technology ourselves for about 12 years at PeakSpan. That helps us really, provide value to our companies, get smarter about industry categories. For example, one of the things we just built that we look to do and help companies with every quarter, we refresh them. Websites like G2 Crowd and, Trust Radius and Capterra, just awesome sources of information. I think if you're, trying to ingest personally every review, and I'm sure as a CEO, most of them read and get an alert and read like every review that comes in, you're inherently biased, right? So you could read 100 reviews, and then Andy, you could as well, and I could as well, and we could all have like 3 different takeaways. Mm-hmm. You're inherently biased. It's impossible to ingest all that information. So we've built technology that actually leverages NLP to extract key themes from every review, measure those key themes relative to your competitors, so you can really kind of granularly look at, here's the sentiment that our customers have, positive or negative, and you can drill down into specific, examples of it. Here's the themes that we are really strong on, product quality, customer service. Here's where we're kind of weak. So that's one example of one. Any financial analysis, financial modeling, I think those are often skills that companies we work with don't have or are not great at, and they have no reason to be. And so we can be helpful there. Thinking through things like how to scale a sales team, right? And how to structure and organize the sales team and the hierarchy and put in place the resources and the infrastructure and enablement tools to scale that team. It's really, the benefit of our experience is the best thing we can offer. And so trying to package and almost productize that experience into tangible, workshops or analyses or support tools is really what we look to do. So we fight like hell. I would be very upset if any entrepreneur that anyone at PeakSpan's ever worked with said anything but, they're the hardest working guys around the table, because it's just a hard work model.
Well, I want to talk about an article that you guys had on your series of articles you had in your blog about your PeakSpan growth fables. And you talk about fortress building. I thought that was an interesting concept. First of all, love the fact you guys referenced David Macaulay's book Castle, which, as my kids were growing up, that was one of our go-tos.
Awesome, nice.
So where's this idea of fortress building come from? I know it goes back to sort of what we talked about before. Is fortress, implicit in that use of the word, is that something that's built to last, as opposed to, the example we gave before, sort of pump and dump.
Totally. Well, thank you for looking at those. Yeah, the what Andy's referencing is we have this, this series of we call them our growth parables. You see so many of the same things with every company, right? Really across categories, but working with 50 plus companies. Every company's journey is unique, of course, but you see so many of the same like speed bumps and road signs. And so the growth parable kind of idea was, let's, use analogies or, reference literary works to make them kind of approachable and just talk about, things we've seen or parts of our philosophy that are really relevant. The fortress building mantra is all about it's what's most kind of crazy and wild to me is a lot of times when you see, this company that's scaled to whatever, 5 or 6 million of ARR, really on the back of their, blood, sweat, and tears, and they haven't raised much money to get there. And then they raise this monster round from a crazy growth investor, and they're pumped about it. The day one of partnering with that investor is going to be just reintroduction of so much operational risk. And so like you've built this nice structure and it has a great foundation. And then all of a sudden you're like, all right, we're going to try to build, an absolute high rise on top of this structure. And by virtue of doing that, you're really kind of jeopardizing and kind of re-exposing the foundation you built to risk, to dramatic risk, right? Yeah. And so part of our model is, and part of our model is almost like it's like do no harm, right? First thing, do no harm, and really preserve preserve and buttress and bulwark the foundation and build out the city walls from there, and never reintroduce operational risk if you don't have to. And sometimes you do have to, but in terms of hiring too quickly or spending too quickly when you don't have the data to assert that it's the right thing to do, it's just unnecessary. As long as everyone's aligned and pragmatic about what are we building to and how do we get there. That's just a critical part of it is just aligning around what the expectations are and making sure they're reasonable.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that caught my eye in going through the growth fables, though, that I really like, because the most successful startups I've worked with and entrepreneurs I've worked for were basically bootstrapped. And you talk about in this article about basically, if you're building a fortress setting teams, treat capital as a scarce asset. So they're basically operating under a theory of constraints, and which I think is so valuable for a startup organization, is because it requires greater creativity and ingenuity about how we're going to solve this problem. Right, the problem of growth. How are we going to solve it? How are we going to approach it? How are we going to approach our customers? How are we going to deal with our customers if we don't have unlimited resources?
Well, and what the beauty of that is too, Andy, is if that's your approach, it's just operationally more efficient in general, right? Because you have that DNA of just incredible capital efficiency, valuing dollars, to your point. The other real big benefit is, because you haven't raised a ton of money, you probably own a lot of your business as a senior team, and thus inherently what you need to see in terms of absolute exit value and price to get as much or more money if you had raised a bunch is way less, right? Because you're not diluted down. And so if you do that, there's so much value because you can pursue an exit. And by the way, we look at this data because we're data geeks. Year in and year out, 80% of exits, if you breach 100 million of exit value as a software company, so that's success in and of itself, 80% of the time you're selling between 100 and 350. And so one of our core principles is everyone we work with, we should all be high-fiving if we're selling in that zone, right? And so if we get to that zone and we call ourselves PeakSpan because that can be the first proverbial peak, and then we can chart to other peaks, right, with more data and more conviction. But that first peak, we should align on what it is, and it should be reasonable. And if you haven't raised a ton to get there, you can sell for $150 million and have a generational wealth event. And that's awesome. That's great. It's great for everyone.
Yeah, and it may not be, hundreds of millions for the individuals, but as you said, it's generational wealth because they own the bulk of the company.
We ran the math. I think every one of our CEOs at an exit value of $250 million will make more than the founder CEO of Box made when the company went public.
Right.
And that's just like, that's a horrible, that's sad because, you've done so well and built so much, but you've succumbed to the drip
dilution
feed the constant drip feed of the epidemic that is venture capital. And it's a horrible way to manage the business, raising to get to the next raise versus raising to, build value with that money.
Yeah, when I think that is really such a cautionary tale. I love that example you gave about, your executives in your portfolio, maybe fewer zeros on the exit valuation, but more zeros for them personally.
Big time.
And I think it's such a hard concept for many entrepreneurs to grasp, and you've certainly touched on it explicitly here, is that investors aren't always in alignment with you as what your goal is as an entrepreneur.
I think they're often misaligned, and I think and entrepreneurs are right to be skeptical too, because for me, VC, so much of it historically is this weird black box where it's like you're engaging with an investor, you don't really know what they're doing. By the way, they're probably not really doing much work or analysis. It's just kind of shooting from the hip, and then they come back to you and say yay or nay, and kind of move on. That's great. It's just this black box. It's very opaque and nebulous. You don't know what they're kind of doing to get to their decision. Conversely, we actually have a thing where whenever we close a partnership, you're going through this really crazy, high overhead, really onerous diligence process for 30 days, and you're giving so much information to the investor. It's really taxing. The first thing that we do is we present everything we learned back to the senior team to show them, what we saw, good, bad, ugly, because it's just a great way to learn about your business from an outsider perspective.
Right.
And folks don't do that. It's shocking to me that folks don't do that. Yeah, well, free consulting, but it's also like, why would you not do that, right? We're all in this thing together. And so that's, I think that's part of it. And so it's really just wild to me that, things like that are not done. Transparent conversations are really not had, because if you need to puff out your chest and by the way, it's easy to be seduced by the big logos of companies that have crushed it. I totally get that, and if that's your shtick and you're comfortable with it, that's fine, and power to you. But if you don't really understand what it means to take money and the unnatural things that you can be forced to do in that model, you should be really kind of approach it cautiously. The one anecdote that I'll reference, Andy, that I think you'll love, my partner Phil and I worked with a company called HireVue.
Sure. I know that.
HireVue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we partnered with them back in 2012 at our old firm. I remember the founder, Mark Newman, picked Phil and I up in his beat up Toyota Corolla from the airport and drove us to their office in Utah. He had the one of those cars with like the manual roll down windows. And I remember my window was stuck, and so I couldn't even roll down my window, and his AC was broken. So it was like 100 degrees. It was, and by the way, that was so endearing, and probably one of the best parts about the trip. And so we put $10 million into the company. There were $4 million of ARR. Company did really well, and everyone on the team really wanted to go for it. And so we raised money from 2 really high profile investors, a bunch of it, and the company just really took their burn rate up. They did very well. The company sold last year to Carlyle for about $700 million. But the founder, we were catching up with him the other day. One of the things he said to me was, I think I knew it was out of control when I was walking down the halls of my office, and I saw someone I had just hired 2 weeks ago who was training someone on the sales team. And he was like, that's when I knew it was kind of out of control. So I think if you asked him, he would say, I would do it a little bit differently if I could have done it again, because, even with success in that model, it's still uncomfortable at times, and you're going to be pushed to do things that are unnatural, really, versus just iterating your way there.
Right.
We're all for big exits, but don't commit to that on day one.
Well, and you talk about it in the growth fables. You say that fortress businesses aim to grow as fast as they can, but no faster. And I just think that's a great perspective to have, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, because I sort of think of the Deming quote about every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it does, right? And
sorry. Yeah, no, sorry, I keep cutting you off. That founder, one of his best quotes was, most companies don't die of starvation; they die of indigestion.
Right. Too much capital.
I think it's absolutely. The other concept we talk a lot about is, are you selling the house or bringing in a roommate? Because if you're selling the house, of course, you just care about likelihood of close and price. But if you're bringing in a roommate, you're like, are they going to, wash the dishes, and who are their friends? And are they going to play loud music late at night? You're growing with that person. And so, price and terms absolutely matter, but there's so much more that goes into the equation that really, really matters, in my view, way more than that. And so it's not focused on enough.
Yeah. So tell us about the work you do then with your portfolio companies, with the sales teams, helping them structure themselves for success.
Absolutely. So one of the things that we've done over time is, some of our peers and competitors will have these kind of in-house alpha services benches. So you'll have, folks on the payroll that, and it's a big part of the value they, tout that they provide working with this team in-house. I think those are great for some things, right? If you want somebody who's paid $80K a year to do a model for you, financial model, that's awesome. I think, the folks that you really want to interface with that have been there, done that from an experienced, operator perspective, they're probably not going to work at a venture or private equity firm, or just not have another job ever. And so we've actually built this kind of this operating advisor bench, and these folks are on demand. And it's folks that we've worked with in the past that are just absolute killers in given areas that, again, would never take another job or don't want one, and probably would never work at a venture firm full time, but they love working with companies. And so one of the things we do from a sales perspective is two folks that we work with. It's got Pete Daffern, who's a CEO that we've backed twice. He was president of NetSuite after that. He's been everything from, first employee to 7,000th employee, and he's just an amazing strategic sales guy and strategic sales mind. And he works with another one of our operating advisors, Howard Bell, who was the head of product at PayPal. They have done and built, and we've kind of helped productize with them just this amazing workshop around ICP. So really defining, understanding, and really kind of honing your ideal customer profile. And so we do this every time with companies. It's a really, as you can appreciate, Andy, and I know you talk about this too, just understanding your ICP almost to the point where it's like uncomfortable how defined it is, because you feel like there's not enough prospects out there. That's one of the huge things that we do, just strategically, and just trying to figure out what your sales motion is targeted at and towards.
Yeah, I mean, that speaks to the great fear of so many entrepreneurs, which is, if we get too specific in our ICP, who are we going to sell to? And
totally,
and this gets back to the theory of constraints, right? Which is, one startup I was at, we identified at one time we had 30 potential customers worldwide, and we're sort of thinking, how are we going to build a business on that? But you do.
Well, and also, Andy, you can't pursue growth at all costs with a tightly defined ICP, right? And so one of the knock-ons, the really negatives of that model, from my perspective, is if you're pursuing that approach, you kind of have to go so broad and be in every conversation, many of which you shouldn't, that it's just kind of hard to be specialized. If conversely you have a pragmatic investor and pragmatic team and a pragmatic set of goals, you can really specialize and then build out from there. So I think that's huge. So the ICP stuff is great.
Right.
We work hard with teams to, just do things like sales productivity and efficiency modeling. What's interesting, I've never seen a financial model from a company that assumes any sales rep churn, which is something that we, by the way, it has a big impact, especially in an enterprise sales model. And so we just work with teams to really think through and model out what that all means, and work with them to, think through what the right number of, reps in a given cohort might be. So we can kind of hire appropriately, train, enable them, and then see how they're doing, versus hiring 10, 15 reps right out of the chutes. Let's hire 2 and, just kind of see what they're doing, measure and optimize from there. We actually think about our business as in our team as strategic sales folks as well. And so we were doing this ICP workshop with, Pete and Howard, who are just incredible, so many times with our companies that we said, why don't we do this ourselves? And so we actually we turned the script on ourselves, and we did an ideal entrepreneur profile workshop for PeakSpan. And so we think hard about who we're selling our quote unquote product to as well, because again, the things that we provide and kind of drive and the things we talk about, they're not right for everyone, right? So we shouldn't be in certain conversations, and I think just kind of aligning the organization, whether it's an investment group or a business, just around who we're selling to and why they care is huge. So we did that ourselves.
No, excellent. All right. Well, so if someone's listening in the audience, they're looking to fund their entrepreneurial venture and software venture, and they like your approach, how do they contact you?
Sure. And again, just really appreciate the time here today. So Matt Melymuka, you can reach me at matt@peakspancapital.com. Anyone who's interested in the growth parables or any of the stuff that we talked about, we also do these masterclass series, and Pete and others come and kind of present to our teams, and they're on our website too, PeakSpanCapital.com. We've got a section of it called Scaling HQ, where there's just a lot of great content for entrepreneurs. And the reason we're all in this business is to help and work with entrepreneurs at the end of the day. So always happy to help.
Yeah, and I encourage people to go to your website and read those growth fables. I really enjoyed them. I think a lot of good lessons for operators, as well as aspiring entrepreneurs.
Awesome. Well, I truly appreciate it, Andy. You guys have such a great reputation, and just you produce amazing content yourself. So really, just humbled to be on the show.
Oh, Matt, thank you very much. It's very kind of you. And look forward to talking again.
Sounds great.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank my guest, Matt Melymuka, for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And you can do all that on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this episode is over. So thank you for your help. And as always, thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.
Hi, friends. I have something really exciting to share with you. We're launching a new podcast called the RevOps Podcast as part of the ringDNA podcast family. Today's leading B2B companies are embracing revenue operations as the answer to misaligned people, processes, and data that lead to recurring sales inefficiencies. However, many people still have critical questions about RevOps. What processes and tools do I need? How do I structure my team? How do I measure outcomes across sales, marketing, and customer success? And what are the best practices for doing that? So join Jordan Henderson, Jonathan Stevens, and Brandon Redlinger, and some of the world's leading revenue operations leaders as they tackle the important questions many of you face today when building a RevOps function. From ringDNA, the company that transforms sales teams into high-performing revenue drivers, comes a podcast guaranteed to go beneath the surface-level conversations and dive deep into the world of RevOps. Your hosts deliver unfiltered, thought-provoking discussions and actionable takeaways on every episode about the ideas, processes, and technology changing the B2B sales landscape. Visit ringdna.com/RevOps to learn more or subscribe now on your favorite podcast player. What if your sales team could know the moment a buyer arrives on your website and talk with them instantly? With Qualified's conversational sales and marketing platform purpose-built for Salesforce, that's all possible. It's not rocket science, it's common sense. Conversations move deals forward. Live chat, voice calls, and meeting bookers accelerate sales conversations without a single email exchange. Capture prospects in that magic moment when they're most interested in learning about your business. Head on over to qualified.com to chat with their team and learn more.